This is Optometrists Building Empires, and I'm your host, Ankit Patel. Each week, we'll explore the journey of practice ownership and leadership in optometry. Join us for insights and strategies from the top minds in our field. This show is sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team helps your office increase revenues, reduce costs, and reduce staffing headaches. Let's build your empire together. Welcome back to another episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Today's episode, we're going to look back at what our guests think the most important thing that helped them grow their empire. You'll notice a powerful theme running through these answers: the critical importance of strong, cultivated human connections to help grow a successful optometry practice. So please listen to Dr. Jessica Pugh, Dr. Shane Swatts, Dr. Richard Levin, Bill Noble, Dr. Jeffrey Neighbors, and Dr. Susan Truong as they share their strategies, insights, and foundational elements that drove their practices to success. What was the most important thing that helped you grow your empire?
So I've been thinking about this question. I think at the end of the day, what it all boils down to has been relationships in various capacities across the board. But I think relationships have been kind of the foundation of any growth that we've had from the start all the way until now and even moving into the future.
Yeah, and I think, can you tell me a little bit more about what that means to you specifically? Do you have a story to tell? How do you view relationships and why it was so important for you?
Sure. So my dad, Dr. Brad Black, is the one that started the practice here originally 40 years ago. We were brand new to the area, not from here. It was a real kind of grassroots effort on his part to establish himself in the smaller community. We are in a suburb of Louisville, Kentucky. So we live in Indiana. Our main location and our surgery center are on the other side of the river, but it's a suburb of Louisville, Kentucky. So I remember being a little girl and running around the hospital with him. He took hospital call. I remember going to talks at nursing homes and churches and clubs, local clubs and things like that, where he would go in with this little slide deck and, give talks and show, slides of cataract surgery and happy patients afterwards. And it's fun for me to reflect back on that and how much things have changed, over the years. He also spent a lot of time establishing relationships with local optometrists who were already here and had a patient base that would then be able to trust him with their patients for their cataract surgery and their postoperative care. So I remember being a little girl running around with those optometrist kids, and it really had big influence on me too when I was trying to decide what direction I wanted to head with my future too. Right. So, I think those relationships within the community and then the relationships with the local optometrists, okay, I got to kind of see that grow. And the patients, the community, it's fun. Even now, my dad will be 74 this year, and he loves to go to the Japanese steakhouse, and we'll be sitting there and run into a patient from 35 years ago, and he remembers their name or what he did for them and who they are and asks how they're doing. And so it's just kind of fun to be able to see those relationships that he fostered so many years ago. I mean, I remember being little too, and he recorded every cataract surgery. So it was not weird for me to walk through the living room and see a big, eyeball on the big screen TV, because he was recording from one VHS tape to the other. So it had to play. So, just kind of fostering those relationships even in our community.
It's a great question. And, there's kind of a story that comes along with that a little bit. So around 2016, I started doing a lot of things outside of the optometry industry, kind of getting insight from other industries on how I can implement some of what they do in eye care. And that led me to some events I used to go to in California, which were all married businessmen. We did a lot of crazy stuff, but I got to interact with people who were in coal mining, owned coal mines, owned airlines, owned all these different things. So I got a lot of really unique insights. And when I came back from that meeting, I came back and I told my business partner, who's also my wife, and my administrator and all my team, I was like, guys, I'm done seeing primary care patients. They thought I was absolutely crazy. They're like, what do you mean? You see patients 5 days a week. And my desire at that time was to back out and really focus on specialty services. And so that's actually what led me into the dry eye space. There was a short stint there where I tried to run the practice myself and realized I was really bad at that. So we ended up hiring an administrator. And I got back into my domain in the exam room. But, the way I practice today is very different than before. I only do dry eyes. I only do aesthetics. So I've removed myself out of primary care. And that was probably the biggest change that my practice has seen. It's funny because I removed myself from primary care and our revenue went up. And I wasn't sure at first how to take that, right? But it was because I was bringing in additional revenue, higher revenue, not getting these small copays from vision plans. And so that was really a shift in our practice and how we do many, many, many things, from training to presentations to patients to, I was the guy in the exam room that used to be really nervous when I was doing primary care. If I was sitting there with a patient, they had a concern about a $15 copay, I was really nervous to talk about that. I would go get my staff members to come in and talk about it. And so from being in that place to where I am now, which is presenting a $3,000 package to a patient without blinking, it seems like a long distance to go. But we just developed strategies. We developed ways to do it. We developed language to talk about it. And so that has been the biggest foundational change in my practice since I started.
Interesting. Tell me a little bit more how that all works. So I heard a lot of different moving parts there, from getting yourself out of the business to having I think it's a strategy is what you said.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to have a focus on these patients.
Yeah.
Tell me how you implemented that, how you think about that. You did mention something interesting that I want to hone in on, expand on more. You mentioned how everything sort of aligned, and then you went to the story of, if I have to worry about a $15 copay, I went from that to selling $3,000 or packages.
Yeah.
Talk about the transformation, how that happened.
Yeah, it was very interesting. It was really trial by fire. I was an early adopter of IPL. I remember when this was when I was actually in the practice attempting to run it. We eventually hired an administrator who's much better at it than I am. I'm really a big fan of hiring the professionals, right? I'm not a professional business operator, so I hired a CFO/admin. But I had read a little bit about IPL. One day, a rep came in and gave me about a 3-hour lesson on IPL. I bought it that same day, really kind of sight unseen. And that started my path down this specialty services. And we've branched out into myopia management, scleral lenses, and all these other things. But really, it was a bit of trial by fire, meaning that I had to learn really quickly what words to use, how to connect with patients on a personal level, to get them to truly understand their disease process so that they would want to invest in advanced treatments. And so a lot of that, we use as part of OD immersion. So we learned to do this, and then we went out and started teaching other people. But there's a lot of neurofinance principles. There's a lot of really being specific about your treatment goals. There's simple things you can do. The first 10 seconds you walk in the room is really where we always talk about us judging patients. Patients judge us. Those first 10 seconds are really important, right? So what I used to do is walk in the room, shake their hand, and I realized I was immediately then turning my back to them, grabbing my cabinet, putting my gloves on while I'm still talking to them. Probably one of the worst things you can do, right? So I learned that I need to walk in, I need to shake hands. That physical touch is important. That eye contact is important. And there's this concept that we use in ODI called the golden minute, which is really where you sit and just listen, right? We as doctors oftentimes will hear what the patient's saying and then immediately interrupt with our advice or our input on that, as opposed to just sitting back and listening. And I actually learned that from my consulting partner, Chantel Garcia, and it's great advice. So a lot of it is also speaking to the patient in a way that, You are not speaking to the prefrontal cortex, right? You're not speaking to their analytical mind in the beginning. You're speaking to that croc brain, right? That brain, the part of the brain that really is determining fight or flight, because you want them to, you got to earn their trust. And if you don't get in there and speak to that part of the brain using certain techniques, then they're starting to dissect. They're trying to figure out, when you first walk in the room, can I trust this person?
Yeah.
Or can I not trust this person? And so my first 2-3 minutes in the room is just making sure they understand I'm there to help them, gaining their trust. And that's, again, through multiple means, multiple strategies.
The first thing that we did when we started, frankly, and I know it sounds crazy, is we literally just looked for Chick-fil-A. And the one thing I always noticed is there's always a line of cars around a Chick-fil-A. And so the first thing we did was I looked for Chick-fil-A's, and then at the same time got a map of all the optometrists from the Maryland State Association. And then I looked for optometrists that were 60, 65, getting up there in their locations. And then the first one we found was in an area called Perry Hall or White Marsh, Maryland. And it's literally in the parking lot of a Chick-fil-A from an older optometrist. And and we go through the details, when we first took that over, he was doing about 400 gross revenue. It was rather rough. And in first year, we did 1.2 in the same location, same space, just by leveraging the customer that Chick-fil-A has. And it took time to realize. And over as years went by, we didn't realize it's the same customer. It's a savvy suburbanite. It's a 44-year-old married woman with 2 kids, average household income of 120 to 130,000 is the targeted customer that Chick-fil-A hits in their sleep. Not knowing it, that's what we landed on. And then going forward, that's what we've always focused on. So to answer your question.
Super. It's funny that same demographic, we had another doctor on, Dr. Chris Browning. He said he even has an avatar. He calls her Ashley. And Ashley is exactly pretty much in that same vein, the same demographic. So it seems to be a continuous theme that I'm hearing from a lot of folks who have multiple locations. So that's a really cool strategy. So find a Chick-fil-A, they did all the heavy lifting for you, and then try to find doctors who may have an established presence, so you're not just starting cold, and then grow it from there. Do you use similar strategies now to grow?
Oh, thankfully now we're way more sophisticated. We still look for Chick-fil-A's.
Okay.
We still get older doctors, way more sophisticated. And we've integrated, we have ophthalmology. One of the things I realized too at the time is I was sitting on a cataract ranch. Because he was an older doctor, we were getting a lot of cataracts rolling in. So we were seeing, I was referring out, I started tracking it. I still have the piece of paper, actually. I was tracking how many cataracts I was referring out. And within the first 6 months, and we were averaging between 30 and 40 cataracts a month referred out. So a year or two goes by and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm sending out 30 cataracts a month. And back then the reimbursement was more. And at Christmas, it was Dr. Sandler was the local ophthalmologist. I'm getting a bucket of fruit saying, thank you for your referral. So I'm thinking about, so I sent this guy, $700,000, $1 million worth of revenue, and I got a bucket of fruit. So after year 2, I called him. I'm like, his name's Mike. I'm like, Mike, listen, I just sent you all this. This isn't going to work for me. We have to figure this out because I'm tracking it. Here it is. And it was paper written.
Yeah.
So he looked at it and he's like, yeah, you're right. And he was a little more sophisticated with electronic records and things at the time. And then we made a deal and we made a separate company of where I became 50-50 partners in an ophthalmology company. And then eventually I bought the ophthalmology company and integrated the whole thing into one vertical system.
And so the initial strategy was, I'm hearing a consistent theme, data-driven, right? Data-driven and digitization, right? But at the same time, doing this hard work, if data's not there, the old school, like paper tracking, paper records. I remember doing that starting my career too. And not in optometry, but way back when in different fields. So you took first step, Chick-fil-A, just happened to stumble on the mid 40s suburban woman, a certain level of income. Now what I'm hearing is as you expanded, you had one opportunity. You found out that they were an elderly patient base because you had a lot of cataracts going out. So it sounds like, just like we're introducing you, you're hyper focused on the patients you have there and making sure their needs are met. It's almost like you're maximizing the opportunities that are within that one practice before you go to another completely separate area.
100%. I was so focused on every patient or customer in that room, in the walls, and I always just tell them we can control what happens in these walls, and just increase volume. We didn't have to do marketing and spend all. Hey, listen, at the end of the day, everything's based on trust, relationships. That only happens by seeing customers and patients in the beginning. It's there's a trust factor, and when you're good at what you do, that patient goes home and tells at the kitchen table that mom is sitting there and telling the whole family. That cost me zero, other than being a great person and connecting with the patient, right? That we all know how to do, versus, Instagram and Facebook and this mass advertising stuff that, in my opinion, builds brand, but doesn't build the actual customer sitting in your seat. That's built on trust, word of mouth. That's my opinion. And that's what we did. And we still do today.
I think it boils down to relationships, and I'll use that term, not only relationships from professional relationships, but we're talking about relationships with investors, relationships with lenders, relationships obviously with our franchisor. Having come from within the Luxottica network, I was very familiar with a lot of the decision makers. So I think at the fundamental foundation of everything that we've done has been relationships. I had to go raise money, from some of my West Point classmates to start the process when we bought our first 10 stores. And so I leaned into those personal relationships forged at the academy and raised $2.1 million. We bought our first 10 stores and we were approved because I knew the decision makers on the other side of the table were all people that I had worked with previously in my role at LensCrafter. So that's what got us started. And then as we have grown the business over the past 11 years, again, I keep coming back to that familiar touch point of relationships with lenders, first with Fifth Third Bank, now with Bank of Montreal from that standpoint. So having, a strong relationship with our lender has been absolute key as we've grown with pretty much using debt financing and growing our store count from 10 to our current level of 92. We also have investors. We have a private equity fund, Lowwater, that owns 35% of our business. And so we tapped into the PE world and built relationships, within that community that has allowed us to continue to grow and build a platform, make investments in the technology that allows us to have a scalable platform. So the short, succinct answer to your questions, it's all about relationships across a broad spectrum, of disciplines, if you will. I think that's what allowed us to be successful.
Yeah, I was reading a book called The New Business Road Test. And one of the key elements for success is having relationships up and down the supply chain so that when stuff happens, you can smooth out issues. So you were on both sides of the equation. So you knew the operational side, and then the financing side, you had relationships there. So anytime you hit a road bump, because I think a lot of times people might hit a road bump, like you could probably tell us a couple examples of road bumps that you hit, but because of that relationship, you're able to smooth them over.
Well, it's certainly not if, but when, because any entrepreneur will tell you that road bumps are par for the course, and so we've hit several road bumps over the course of our 11 years in business, and probably the best example would be COVID. When COVID hit, you talk about getting hit in the face with a 2x4 because the world essentially stopped. And not all of the COVID relief legislation had been passed. And so we were scrambling from that standpoint. So we were able to lean into our franchisor because we had relationships. We were able to lean into our lenders. We were able to lean into our landlords and leveraging those relationships because everyone was, scratching their head and trying to figure it out. And because we had strong relationships to start, we were given, I think, some leeway and leniency that others may not have been afforded from that standpoint. So COVID is always, the first example of that road bump, that kind of disruptive, pandemic that literally changed the way we did business. And again, through the the grace of God and the legislatures, we were deemed an essential business. So we were only closed one day, literally one day during all of COVID. And so we were able to have revenue continue to come in, albeit at obviously a reduced level from that standpoint. But every dollar that came in was absolutely essential in allowing us to survive, the COVID pandemic. So that's probably the best example of a huge roadblock that we laid into those relationships to help us, to navigate our way over, around, under, whatever we had to do to keep the doors open and keep our employees employed.
I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and a lot of my predecessors on this topic say the same thing I do. Empire sounds like such a glorious word, right? It sounds flowery, and it makes it feel like, oh, wow, this is a great big deal. And it is important, but as an empire, I think the biggest thing is that heart of service and listening to the patients and what they need. Most of us got into the profession because we want to provide care. We want to take care of our patients. We want to make sure that they have the things they need, whatever that falls into, and whatever version of practice looks like for you. So when you do that and you do it with that heart of service, it makes a big difference in how your practice grows, how your patients see you, and it really translates into growth. Now, does that mean exponential growth and numbers and everything else? No, but little bits at a time, that service to your patients is what shines through. And that's really what matters to them in the long run.
Okay. Yeah. And let's dig into that a little bit more. Can you share with me a story that kind of highlights that best for you? Like something visceral that you're like, yeah, this is where that made a difference.
Well, and I think it goes to the conversation about, empires and multiple practice ownership. And through my profession, there's been plenty of times when that's grown and that's shrunk. I've had single locations, I've had multiple locations. I'm to the 2 locations now, and that fits me really well. And through that, I think the one thing that always is amazing to me and very humbling to me is when you see a patient and you move into a different location, or you move somewhere else. I've moved across the state. I've moved, several different places, and you have those patients that find you. They follow you because of the care you provide, because of that conversation you had with them about how their mom had macular degeneration and how they're worried about this, but the way that you talked them through it made them feel better about their eyes, about their healthcare. Those are the connections that really speak to why patients keep coming back to doctors that take good care of them. And I'm not the only one. I know that by and large, optometry is very, very good at listening to their patients to make sure that they're giving them the care that they need. But those interactions, those one-on-one with those patients, is the thing that gives you the energy to get through the 20 patients a day, the 25 patients a day that you have to do from a business standpoint. But it really brings you back to that center of, why did I decide that this was the profession for me? What made me want to be an optometrist since the time I was 2 or 3 years old? For whatever reason, that care that I received as a little kid translates to how I take care of my patients now and keep that cycle going.
Building relationships. It's connecting with people, right? I mean, these days and age, we can wow them with technology. But one thing I've at the top of the list is the empathy and that heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul connection with that individual you're working with, building that relationship, be it a patient, a client, real estate investment, whatever areas of life we're in.
And tell me a little bit more about that. What does that mean to you? Can you share maybe a story about what that looks like, that so people can get an understanding of what that means?
Sure, I'll tell you what it means. I'll tell you this, though, how I practice now as an optometrist. I'm not the same person as when I started out. And what I mean by that is patients have really helped to enrich my life, to open my eyes more, no pun intended there, in terms of how to be a better person. And here's an example. Listening. Listening is a learned skill. And when you say a story, I have type A, some will say even type AAA personality, right? Taking in a medical history, and it's like, okay, so tell me this about this and this, and all right, okay, and what's that? All right, you're taking this medication. How long has it been in? And I had this one patient, and this patient just looked at me, a little older, and just looked at me and said, "Are you going to let me answer, or are you just going to keep asking questions?" And I was like, wow, okay, that was a big lesson there. It's like, hey, if you're going to ask patients questions, stop, allow them to respond, truly listen, truly process what they're hearing, allow them to put a period at the end of their sentence, their thought process, then next. So that is one of a few stories. But when that occurred, I was like, because sometimes we get so wrapped up and we don't realize how do we come across. So it's good to get that different perception. And when that patient said that, I was like, oh, whoa, okay. And ever since then, it's a high awareness, right? It's a higher level of awareness of how we are and who we are and how we are perceived and how the other end receive us. So that was I appreciated that. It came across as slightly harsh from the patient, but I greatly appreciate it when I think back. I'm like, okay. And moving forward, I changed my way. So that was one great story there.
Interesting. And so with your relationships, let's talk a little bit more about that. How do you practice now? What does that look like with your current patients, with your staff? What are some of the things that you're doing to develop those relationships? And yeah.
Again, at the top of this is listening. Listening, I've come to learn. Empathizing. Empathy, what does it really mean? An example I use, whether it's with patients, staff, my work life, my home life, an example would be walk in their shoes. You know, just pretend, just say you have this magic wand and you're like, whoosh, right? You're in their skin, you're in their shoes, you're in their body. And just pretend, imagine that you're there. And that way you can, okay, what are they feeling? What are they going through? Because we don't know everybody's story, right? They may come in happy, sad, stressed, and we don't want to, versus reacting, it's responding. So when you say, how do we do it and how do I share and teach others, is put yourself in their place, you know, versus jumping if somebody coming upset about something and it's just like, right, okay, just take a moment, deep breath, and let's work on listening and having a better understanding. Truly hear them out. Because the oftentimes we know this, especially as doctors, right? When we listen better, then we have been given the diagnosis already, all right? The answer already. I mean, patients, they're telling us. And then when we hear more of it, when we listen more carefully, then we already, the answer is there, the solution is there. So it's just empathize, just put yourself in their place, just feel it a little more so.
Gotcha. Okay. I like that. And I like the listening piece. I think that's something that I think we could probably spend the whole podcast talking about, right? Just listen, empathizing. And I like how you said put people, what was it, like be in their shoes?
Yes, their shoes, their skin, you know, just better understanding as what's going on. I mean, that mind reading, shoot. I mean, if we all can master it, it makes it a bit easier. But since we haven't, just really, I call it reading the person, right? Read their energy, their tone, their body language. Because when we're better at reading, then we're better at empathizing and helping them find the solution that best fits them.
How did you develop that skill? Because it sounds like you didn't start there.
Oh, heavens, no. Oh,
Yeah.
my gosh. Are you kidding me? When you say how I developed it, it's, again, patients, just like that one patient. I've had other patients, too, that have done similarly. Another story. Maybe it's a stereotyping, but when there are patients that are elderly, when I say elderly, 60s, but, you know, let's more 70s, 80s, pushing 90s, I have a habit of speaking, getting closer to them and speaking louder. And I had this one patient, she looked at me, she said, "I'm old, but I'm not deaf." I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. So that was another wake up moment. I was like, wow, okay, so now I don't jump into that louder tone. but I make note, I watch, are they wearing hearing aid, one side, both sides? But some will tell me. I mean, again, when you ask, how did you get there? Just life experience, right? Patience experience, patient talent. And some will say, if they keep repeating, what, then you're like, okay, they're not hearing me well. And I'll ask them. I mean, staff would be like, well, how did you know that? You ask, do you favor one ear versus the other, one side versus the other? They'll tell you. And if they do, okay, I'm going to favor. It's again, we want to know anything, right? We always say, go straight to the source. Ask. And when you ask, how have I developed through the years with patients? And I love self-development, right? Reading, learning from mentors, coaches, be it the likes of Tony Robbins, just going to different webinars, seminars. And again, just always, every day, just learning and trying to learn more about myself so I can be better for myself, but in turn for my loved ones in the home life and in the business life, right? Whether it's real estate, it's patience, it's the practice. So yes, life's experience and many patients have really taught me plenty.
That's a wrap on another episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, visit buildingempires.live. This show is proudly sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team was born out of staffing challenges my wife and I faced together, managing multiple optometry locations. We refined our approach at Classic Vision Care and now offer our expertise to others. If you're experiencing challenges with staffing and you'd like to set up a discovery call, we'd be happy to help you and connect you with the right resources. We'll see you next time.